Welcome to the course, Pressure Points for Neck, Shoulder, and Upper Back Pain. As we go through this class, I want you to keep in mind a few key points. The first one is that it's really helpful to think in terms of zones and regions rather than in specific points. So these points that we're going to talk about on the arm that you've probably already seen in some of my introductory videos, these points can vary in location from person to person. Someone with neck pain may have more pain or more sensitivity at a point that's closer to the wrist, while another person may feel the more tender point up higher or in the mid-forearm. So this is why it's important to think in terms of zones and regions which are on a meridian or a myofascial line. Now, for points that are on the hands or the feet, those ones tend to be more specifically located because they're in smaller areas. And for those points, we get the best results when we use a pressure probe or an electrical pin. Some of the points on the hands and feet you can use pressure with. For instance, this zone right here, which Li4 is right in the middle of, this zone, there's a little triangle of points that we can find in this region. This area does respond well with pressure. However, points that are here or here, those points really work best with electro pins. Now the points in the ear, these points also respond best with pressure probes or electro pins because if you apply pressure to your ear, you just can't get enough stimulation at the most effective areas, points, or regions like you can in some of the other areas of the body. So where we find the most variation in point location is on the forearms or the arms or on the legs and the lower legs. So those points will vary in location from person to person, but on the hands and the feet, the point locations do tend to be more specific. So the key point of all of that is that as you move through this class, it is good to think in terms of regions or zones where you'll find points of sensitivity and tender points, rather than thinking of a specific point which is in the same location for everyone, okay? And even on yourself, you may find that that point location will change from one day to the other. So if you work a point here for a few days and that's the most sensitive one on this line, you may find that that point actually shifts up, okay? So think in terms of regions and zones rather than specific points because the points do tend to move. Another key point to remember is that points can be stimulated in different positions. So for some points you can do them standing up. Other points, it may be more easy to reach them if you're seated or if you're laying down or if you're on the floor. And so we're going to go over a variety of different movements and show you how to stimulate each point in the most effective way. So some of the points here on the forearm, they work great with your thumbs and your fingers, but points on the legs or on the calves and the lower legs, those respond best when you use your palm to press into them. If you use your fingers on those, you can't really get enough pressure and you can potentially even injure your thumb if you're applying a lot of pressure on your legs. So different points in different areas respond better to different types of stimulation. So the lower leg points, I do like to use my forearms or this area of my arm to reach some of the points on the legs. I like to use my palms on my legs or on other people's legs as well because the legs are more muscular and more dense, and so we need to apply more pressure to those areas. Now, the other thing to remember is that you can do some of these points laying down. Some are really best when you're seated. Some points you can do standing up. And some of the points, it doesn't even matter. You can do them in any type of position, seated, laying, standing. And then related to this, and which I previously mentioned before, is that different points require different types of stimulation. So generally, the points on the hands and the feet work best when you use a pressure probe or an electro pin. The points on the forearms and the lower legs respond best with your fingers or your thumbs or your palms. And remember that the points on the legs, generally, we're going to use our palms or perhaps our fists or an area of our hand where we can apply more pressure and stronger pressure. And the points on the forearm, typically the thumb or the fingers is enough to get a good result with them. Okay? The third thing to keep in mind is that you don't need to use fancy massage techniques. Now, if you are a massage therapist and you know a variety of techniques, you can do those methods. But if you're a lay person, these points respond with just simple pressure. So you don't need to learn any fancy massage techniques to get results. Usually just simple pressure is sufficient for most of these. Now, in regards to how to apply pressure, there's a few things to keep in mind. One thing is that you don't want to press too hard too fast. So we often think in terms of 3 levels. There's a superficial level, and it only takes light pressure to reach that superficial level. So when you begin, you just want to apply soft pressure so that you don't end up creating bruising or discomfort or perhaps even injuring a muscle. So start with light pressure and then gradually start to apply more pressure. Now, as we think in 3 levels, there's the superficial level, which you reach with light pressure. There's a middle level of the muscles in the fascia, which you reach with more medium pressure. And then some of the points, especially those on the legs, you are going to need to apply more heavy pressure. And that's why we use the palm or the forearm on some of the points that are on the legs, because we need to apply more pressure with those. Some of the techniques that we can use when we're applying pressure, there's basically 2 types. There's what we can call static holds, which is where you find a tender point and then you hold that, and that's a static hold. Basically, we want to hold those from anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes. You may notice that releases occur as fast as 30 seconds. Every day when I do this, I find that a release can happen in myself or in other people in a very rapid amount of time. If you're a person that responds more slowly, or if you have a big body type, or if you're overweight, it may take more time and you may want to hold it for up to 2 minutes. So 30 seconds to 2 minutes is the typical amount of time that we like to hold these points for. Now, the second type of technique that we use after the static methods are moving techniques. So if I find a tender point right here just above my wrist, that might be the most tender point along this line, but it's very beneficial to massage not only that most sensitive point, but you also want to massage points that are about 2 inches above and below that. This applies to the arms and the legs especially. So if you find that most sensitive point right there, just above your wrist, you can do a static hold to start. And then after 30 seconds to 2 minutes, you can start to massage along that line, moving closer to the wrist and going about 1 inch or 2 down towards the wrist. You can massage there looking for additional sensitive points. If you find another tender point or a little bump, or an area that feels like there's a little nodule, then you can hold that and apply static pressure. You also want to go up the line about 2 inches, or maybe even higher. So if this most sensitive point is located about right here, you can find that there are probably some other sensitive points as you come up the arm. And I like to explore about 3/4 of the way up the arm, okay? So the second method after the static hold are these moving techniques. And there's basically 2 types of moving techniques. There's the technique where we can go up and down the line, and that goes in parallel with the muscle fibers. So our muscle fibers are a lot like the grains in wood. They move in a certain direction. Most of the muscle fibers move down the arms and down the legs. So we can massage with the grain of the muscles when we move down the arm or down the leg, or we can do what's called a cross fiber stimulation, where we massage against the grain. Now, you'll know that you're doing a cross fiber stimulation properly if you feel yourself rolling over that muscle. So there's a lot of muscles right in here. The grain of them's going down this way. But if I find a tender point right here, and say I've already held it for 30 seconds to 2 minutes, and it's still quite sensitive, and maybe I've moved up and down the line, the last technique that we want to do, which is a moving technique, is to do the cross fiber stimulation of moving in a horizontal direction like this. So when we move across that muscle, that has additional benefits, and it can help that muscle to release the tension, not only at the point, but along the whole line. So the trigger points up here in the neck on the trapezius are going to have a connection to the other muscles that are on that superficial back arm line, okay? So to summarize all of that, there's basically 2 or 3 different types of massage techniques that we can use. There's the static holds that we hold for 30 seconds to 2 minutes. There's the moving techniques where we move with the grain or with the fiber of the muscles. And then there's the cross fiber stimulation where we move in a horizontal direction and we roll over the muscles. And you can feel that because you're going to roll over the belly of the muscle, and it feels different. So keep that in mind. You can use all of those techniques. Those are really all the techniques that you need to know. There's a whole bunch of other fancy techniques that you can apply. If you're a massage therapist or if you're a body worker, great, apply those techniques. If you're a lay person, then you can just stick with these 3 methods and you'll see results with that when you combine it with the movements and with the stretches and with everything else that I'm teaching in the class. To sum up everything we just spoke about, remember to think in terms of zones and regions rather than just points. So you will find tender points, you will find sensitive areas. Be sure to hold those, apply those different types of techniques to them. Apply your static holds, apply your moving techniques of moving up and down and across the fibers, and also be sure to stimulate these points in different positions. So if you stimulate a point such as these that are just below the elbow and you're always in a seated position, that's just going to work from one angle. But if you take a standing position, or if you're in a yoga pose, or in any number of other different positions and you stimulate those points, that can have subtle effects. Like there's been times when I've been working these points either on myself or with a client, and I've been seated in a chair and I'm doing them, and then they work, and then I reach a tolerance and they don't seem to work anymore. And then I simply change the position, or I add some of the movements, or I add some of the stretches with them, and then it gets a better result, okay? So be sure to experiment with it. Take these different tools that I'm presenting here, find what works best for you. I'm also going to give you some protocols that you can use of things that generally work for most people, okay? So we're not just using one point and hoping for a result, but we're massaging in areas and zones, we're applying different pressure techniques to them, and then we're also combining this with stretches and movements. And when you do all of those things together, then you're going to find that you get the best results that are possible using these methods. So that's all I have to say in this introduction. I look forward to hearing from you. I want to hear back from you about the results you're getting. If you have any questions, if you find that the points work great one day and not the next day, then let me know. Let's have a talk about that, because I can help you find the way to use these. You may find that this group of points here on your wrist doesn't work, but the ones in your ear work really well and give a more longer lasting result. I just had an experience recently with someone that I was working with, and we found that these points here on the forearm worked really well for quite some time, but then they seemed to reach a tolerance and the pain started coming back. So what I did is I changed the methods. I started using ear points, and I used just simple pressure in the ear using a pressure probe, and that gave a phenomenal result. Like, they can't even believe how powerful it was. Just one session, and it's been 3 weeks later, and they're still telling me that the pain is much improved and nowhere near it was. Just from a single treatment, using this for about 5 to 10 minutes is all we did. Okay, so if you find that one group of points stops working, or if you reach a tolerance with one group of points, then try some of the other points, try some of the other movements, write me, ask me about it, tell me what's going on, and I'll be happy to respond and make sure that we get you to the next level of improvement, okay?